From WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington, welcome to the Politics Hour starring Tom Sherwood and co-starring Martin Ostermule and LEU. I'm Kojo Nnamdi. Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a contributing writer for Washington City Paper. Tom Sherwood, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Today we're co-starring Martin Ostermule. He's a reporter for WAMU. Martin Ostermule, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Our other co-star is LEU. She's also a reporter for WAMU. Ellie, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Later in the broadcast, we'll be talking with Christian Dorsey, who is vice chair of the Arlington County Board and a principal director of the WMATA or Metro Board of Directors. But first, everything you need to know about what you will see on your ballot if you happen to be voting in the Washington area this weekend. That's why Martin and Ellie have joined us in addition to Tom, who is usually here. So if you have any questions about what you're likely to see on your ballot, you can start calling now, 800-433-8850. Send us a tweet at Kojo Show, email to kojo@wamu.org. You can go to our website, kojoshow.org, watch the live video stream there and ask a question or make a comment. LEU, one race in Northern Virginia seems to be attracting national attention, the fight for the 10th District's congressional seat. Incumbent Republican Representative Barbara Comstock is facing Democratic candidate Jennifer Wexton, who has been receiving financial help from Democrats around the country. Why have Democrats apparently identified Comstock's as a seat to flip?
Yeah, so this is a district that's been held by a Republican for nearly 40 years, but it's been a district that's been changing pretty rapidly and trending blue in recent elections. Hillary Clinton carried it by 10 points in 2016. Last year in the governor's race, Ralph Northam won here, and part of it has to do with the population growth in the region. There are a lot of new residents, new immigrant communities, more Asians and Latinos make this area home. There's also a high population of college-educated, wealthy voters. And President Trump is also unpopular in parts of the region, and Democrats have been really trying to take advantage of that in their hopes of picking up the 23 seats they need to flip the House this year.
What are the biggest differences on the issues between these two candidates in the 10th District?
So they sparred on a number of issues. One issue that keeps coming up has been taxes. Wexton has heavily criticized the GOP tax plan that Congress passed last year, saying the majority of benefits went to the top 1%. She's called it the Comstock-Trump tax scam. On the other hand, Comstock has enthusiastically embraced the tax proposal, the tax plan they passed. She voted for the bill, and she said she'd like to see an expansion on the tax cuts and see more reductions for small businesses. She'd like to see the personal income tax cuts that were in the plan to be permanent. But they have actually agreed on other issues. Federal workers, for example, they both oppose President Trump's proposal to freeze federal workers' pay next year. And on issues like tariffs, they've both opposed the president's announcements on tariffs as well.
It'll be hard to figure that out from watching the commercials that these two candidates are running in this race. The commercials that Jennifer Wexton is running seem to be focusing heavily on President Trump. How come?
So that's been one key strategy for Wexton, is to tie Comstock to Trump. One ad has called Barbara Trumpstock, for example. President Trump is sort of is playing a big role in the race, even though he's not on the ballot. A lot of people see this election as a referendum on President Trump himself. Comstock has sort of separated herself from the president, and political experts say she has a tough balancing act here in terms of separating herself enough from the president, but also not alienating voters who do support the president. Comstock has really tried to pitch herself as an independent voice. She's broken with the president on a couple of issues, the federal worker pay, for example, and has argued against a looming government shutdown. But supporters say, President Trump's not on the ballot, but he's very much playing a big role in the race.
Tom Sherwood, polls indicate that Wexton has a double-digit lead over Comstock. To what extent could this be, on the one hand, the district turning just bluer and bluer, and on the other hand, the way that Jennifer Wexton has been linking her to President Trump?
Well, Trump is the big factor here, I believe, in this race, which is a suburban Washington district, except that it goes way out to Winchester. And Comstock has just had a horrible time with President Trump's popularity. Trump has never been that popular in Virginia, going all the way back to the Republican National, the nomination. So he just hasn't been popular there. And Barbara Comstock has just had a terrible time of being the kind of traditional mainstream Republican that she is and overcoming that hurdle. The Democrats are so enthusiastic. This week, the House Majority PAC, which is a group trying to elect Democrats to take over the House, had an $800,000 buy for ads that you mentioned, and they decided not to spend the money in the 10th District because they believe Jennifer Wexton's going to win.
They seem to think they have it in the bag, LU, and as a result, they decided that they don't have to put in that $800,000 contribution. But there have been surprises before, and Barbara Comstock has been a particularly resilient member representative in that district.
Yeah, Comstock supporters say she's defied polls before, that she has sort of earned this reputation of being basically a hard worker in the district, showing up everywhere, that she's run tight races in the past. I don't think either campaign is calling the race quite yet. There's still 4 more days left, and Wexton's schedule shows she has a packed schedule ahead of her this weekend, sort of canvassing and being out in the community.
Incumbent Virginia Senator Tim Kaine and Republican challenger Corey Stewart have very different approaches to politics and to campaigning, and many in the Republican Party have distanced themselves from Stewart, who they see as extreme. But how much is Stewart affecting other Republicans in this race?
So it's hard to say exactly how much Corey Stewart is hurting other Republicans in the race, but unlike Tim Kaine, for instance, who's been appearing with other candidates on the ticket, Corey Stewart has sort of been on his own. There haven't been many joint appearances with other Republicans running on the ticket. Republicans like Comstock, as we mentioned, have been keeping the president at arm's length, but Corey Stewart, on the other hand, has sort of fully embraced President Trump. And with him at the top of the ticket, some analysts say that might have an effect in terms of Republicans not being as enthusiastic about showing up. We'll see.
And the opposite of that is that the Corey Stewart nearly got the Republican nomination for governor last year because a lot of Trump voters they don't participate in the polls, and they come out and vote. And in the western parts of the 10th District, Corey Stewart could bring out some of those Trump voters who otherwise wouldn't be voting. But Trump, again, is the issue here. And Corey Stewart promised a vicious campaign, and everybody on both sides says he's run one.
One email we got on the Barbara Comstock candidacy, David emails, "I'm still attempting to digest Representative Comstock's interview on your show this week." Representative Comstock joined us by phone last week. "I was struck by Ms. Comstock's approach, responding to your questions with non-stop stream of consciousness campaign slogans. It sounded bizarre. I was particularly put off by the real offense she took when a listener from Maryland was allowed to pose a question." The listener happened to be calling from Maryland.
Right.
And Congresswoman Comstock says, "Well, I don't think you're a constituent of mine."
I listened to that roughly 20-minute thing. I think you maybe got a couple of words in there. You were way too polite, but I can tell you, all I heard from Kojo Namdi was, because she talked a blue streak, and I don't mean blue in the sense of Democrats, and it did not do her well. She didn't articulate where she is. She just kept talking. It was just
one
remarkable.
of the realities of talk radio is that you cannot control a listener who is calling, a guest who's calling in on the phone, because you can't make them signals to wrap it up, and so politicians know how to take advantage of that. LEU candidates are not the only things on the ballot. On Tuesday in Virginia, there are 2 measures on the ballot as well. What are they?
There are 2 constitutional amendments for voters to decide. Both have to do with taxes, property taxes to be specific. The first question has to deal with property that's prone to recurrent flooding. If approved, it will allow local governments to give a partial tax exemption to property owners who make improvements on their property against flooding. Supporters of the measure say this would help property owners who, are threatened by rising sea levels and encourage them to make improvements on their homes. Opponents, on the other hand, say the measure would sort of incentivize developers to develop on low-lying land. The second question has to do with surviving spouses of veterans who've been disabled. It would allow spouses to claim a tax exemption on their property if they move to a new home. Current law only allows them to claim that exemption if they continue to live in the house that they shared with their spouse who had passed away.
Is there any significant opposition to that second measure?
I haven't seen very much opposition to that, no.
There are also a slew of races at the local level across northern Virginia, including heated races for the Alexandria City Council, a contested school board race in Arlington. If people would like to know what will be on their local ballots on Tuesday, Where should they go to find that out?
So the Virginia Department of Elections has a tool on their website that allows you to enter your address. You can see your polling locations and your sample ballot. It's called the Polling Place and Ballot Tool. I found the easiest way to find it was to Google Virginia Department of Elections ballot tool.
Tom Sherwood, have you voted yet?
No, I like to go on election day itself, so that I can talk to the election day workers who really come out every election cycle, just to get a sense of how people are feeling on election day. But I encourage people to vote whenever you can, but the main thing is to vote.
Early voting in the
It's all
District of
done.
Columbia ends today, correct?
That's true. It's done.
Martin Ostermew, Maryland voters will also have 2 ballot questions to decide on this coming Tuesday. What are they?
So neither of them is particularly controversial, nor is there a whole lot of opposition to them, but here we go. Question 1 is about where the money from the state's casinos goes. When gambling was legalized in Maryland about a decade ago, the promise was always, this is just a ton of money that's going to come into the state and it's going to go straight to education.
Everybody thought that.
Everybody thought that. And
Everybody.
that kind of happened.
Well, it did, but
There's the but there. And the but was that the money didn't really go to supplement existing funding. It just supplanted it. So essentially, they put, let's say, $100 million from the casinos into the schools, and then took $100 million that they were going to spend on the schools anyhow and spent it on other things.
Everybody knew that would happen.
Right.
But go ahead.
So basically, this would create what's called a lockbox. It's the favorite term of many a politician, and essentially would say that any of the money that comes in from the casinos to the state would have to be spent to supplement education funding, not supplant it. And by 2023, they say that could be about $500 million a year in extra funding for schools.
If the question passes.
If the question passes. Now, there's no organized opposition. The only opposition I've seen is the Washington Post editorial board, who says it takes away the flexibility that legislators should have to decide how to spend money on other things. But other than that, the governor's in favor, the Democratic Assembly's in favor, so we'll see where it goes. Question 2 is same-day voter registration. So Maryland is kind of quirky. It only offers same-day voter registration during early voting, which ended yesterday, but on Election Day proper, if you're not already registered to vote, you can't register and you can't go to vote. So this would change the constitution, the state constitution, to allow same-day voter registration, which is already allowed in 17 states and D.C. Again, no organized opposition. There was only about 2 Republicans in the general. No, actually, sorry. All the Republicans in the General Assembly voted against putting this on the ballot because they're concerned about voter fraud. They think people are going to come in and vote illegally. Maryland law says that if you're a first-time voter, that your ID can be checked. It doesn't mean it will be checked.
the General Assembly, though, would not approve this. If it took for a decade or so, it failed at the General Assembly.
Yeah, and it was a Montgomery County delegate who spearheaded this, and he told me when I interviewed him, he said he'd been doing it for a decade, and it was, again, Republican opposition, concerns about voter fraud and that sort of thing.
And Tom Sherwood, on the ballot initiative on the education lockbox, I think it's been about at least 2 decades that Maryland has been involved in this conversation about reforming education and improving education in Maryland. It goes back to the Thornton Commission way back when about how this money was. And so it was natural for people to think that, okay, all of this casino revenue going to education will revolutionize education in the state of Maryland. But on the other hand, the post argument that legislators ought to have the flexibility about where it's most appropriate to spend money is a valid argument, but it looks like this time there's going to be a virtual consensus on this issue.
Well, people want money to go to education. In every jurisdiction in the country, the world is changing rapidly, and our education is still back in the agricultural era of America. And so, yes, people want money to go to education. Every place wants better and more schools. They want better paid teachers. They want all of this, and it costs money. But in this case, people will vote for this, and yes, it will tie the hands of legislators to be able to move that money around in different places, and that's maybe the restriction we need to get the money certainly in education. That seems to be the feeling.
If you have questions or comments about what you're likely to encounter on your ballot on Tuesday, give us a call, 800-433-8850, or you can go to our website, kojoshow.org. Watch the live video stream of this broadcast. We're talking with Martin Ostermule and LEU WAMU reporters who have been covering this election. Martin Ostermule, what are the other statewide races that voters can expect to see on the ballot in Maryland?
Well, I think we should go straight to the top because it's the most exciting race. It's the governor's race between Republican incumbent Governor Larry Hogan and Democratic challenger Ben Jealous. I think this has been a fascinating one to watch because, again, it goes against a lot of the things you'd expect given political conditions and given the makeup of the voters in Maryland, a heavily Democratic state, a state that really doesn't like President Trump, but has a Republican governor that, generally speaking, is well liked even by Democrats. He's polled well. Now, we always say, polls don't vote. The polling that happened 2 months ago doesn't reflect how the results are going to come out on Tuesday. But the point is, popular guy, raised a lot of money. Ben Jealous, has a very progressive platform. The platform itself polls well, but what Ben Jealous has been having trouble with is that there's a lot of voters who just haven't known much about him and his platform. And it's something even he admitted. He told me last week at one of the early voting sites in Silver Spring that 30% of Maryland voters still didn't know he was running. And that's a pretty fundamental
problem. And he doesn't have money. He's not on social media. It's very difficult. He was on the show last week. But no, this is the opposite. In Virginia, you have Corey Stewart running against Tim Kaine, and Corey Stewart becoming, if he could wear a costume that looked like Trump, he would. And in Maryland, just across the Potomac River, you have a governor, a fairly successful governor in terms of the polls, who's 20 points ahead of Ben Jealous, trying to stay away from Trump. It's remarkable to me, not in the district, because no one likes Trump in the district virtually. In Maryland and Virginia, Trump is such a big factor, as he is across the country in these midterm elections.
And Raymond tweets in, is there any hope of getting Larry Hogan on the show before Election Day?
Only if he parachutes in today, and maybe, he could, I don't know if you'd allow him to come on Monday, but, the governor has said personally to me he wants to be on the show, but apparently his crack staff has not been able to schedule it.
Two chances, slim and none. But there are a lot of ballot, in addition to the ballot measures, governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, comptroller, state legislature, state senate, House of Delegates, state courts, the Maryland Supreme Court, the Maryland Intermediate Appellate Court, local government elections, Maryland School Board elections in Baltimore, state's attorney, clerk of the circuit court, register of wills, sheriff, orphans court. But Martin Ostermule, what does this go? What does this governor's race boil down to? What are people getting with Larry Hogan, the incumbent, and Ben Jealous, the Democratic challenger?
So Hogan has sold himself as a bipartisan, business-friendly sort of guy. And generally speaking, I think he's convinced a lot of people of that. I was out at an early voting site in Prince George's County just last week. Again, Prince George's County is the largest amount of Democrats in the entire state reside in Prince George's County, and it's assumed that Ben Jealous is going to carry Prince George's County. But still, I was talking to voters, and I definitely had the sort of reaction from people saying, I voted for Ben Jealous because I want to send a message to Republicans, to President Trump, that what they're doing is not acceptable, and I don't want them around. And then I spoke to people who said, listen, Hogan has done a relatively good job. He hasn't offended anybody. He hasn't done anything. There haven't been big scandals. It seems like things are running well, and I personally like him.
But he's a sympathetic character because of his cancer fight.
Yeah, but that's the one thing I heard from voters, both pro and con, pro Jealous and pro Hogan, is just across the board, people would say Hogan seems like a nice guy. He's a pleasant Marylander, and like I can see liking him. I can see having a beer with him. And this was every Jealous voter would be like, I really want Ben Jealous because I care about Medicare for all. At the same time, Larry Hogan's a really great guy, and I don't think he's done anything wrong, but I just like Medicare for all.
What's this obsession with having a beer with? I don't understand the relation.
This goes way back in politics. Politics, elections are about...
remember the beer summit.
Here's the deal. Elections are about emotion, just like this. It's about how people feel about things. It's not necessarily someone's 3-point program to do X. Right. It's how they get to the point of wanting to do that program. Who is the person? And Ben Jealous, for all his national and maybe even international being known, he's not that well known in the state of Maryland, even though he's been involved in some of the legislative issues. And he doesn't have the money. In the campaign, as you start a campaign, getting people to know you, then you attack your opponents during the middle, and then at the end, you reinforce who you are. He does not have the money to do any of that.
And the thing is, and I think Ellie can chime in on this one only because I know that she went to an oyster shucking competition in Southern Maryland a couple weekends ago.
I did.
And the governor was there. And the governor, that's what he does. I mean, he shows up at any event that screams Maryland, that screams tradition, that screams this is what Marylanders do. He shows up. And, every analyst I've talked to has joked that he's the sort of governor that literally is like leave no selfie untaken, this idea that he will stop and talk to everybody.
But showing up is half the battle in politics.
Was there beer at the oyster shucking event?
There was beer, yes.
Of course.
There you go, see?
Yes.
But
there's also a county executive race in Prince George's County, but Angela Alsobrooks, who won the Democratic primary, does not have a challenger. So it's not really a race. It is, however, an election. Why doesn't she have a challenger? Can you remind our listeners why?
Well, the Republican challenger dropped out.
Jerry Mathis.
Exactly, and there was a little controversy as to why and how the circumstances around him dropping out. But yeah, he said he was taken by.
He was
Also
support.
Brooks.
He was going to support.
He was going to
Angela
support her,
Alsobrooks.
exactly.
Regarding
So-
his father and all that stuff. What's important about this race is not that Angela Alsobrooks is going to be the new county executive of Prince George's. Is that just like people saw Rashawn Baker, she is a rising star in state politics. She has, and we will see what she does as county executive and what happens next. But everyone says, watch her.
Liu, I don't think you have a response to this tweet, but I'm going to throw it at you anyway. It came from Cedric. When is Virginia going to get rid of this silly in-person absentee early voting? I voted last Saturday, and a guy couldn't vote because he didn't fit any of the reason codes. Fortunately, I work outside of Fairfax County, or I would have been subject to the 11-6 crowds. People don't trust it. I have no idea what he's talking about.
I don't have an answer for that, but I can find out.
Virginia is more of a southern state than people realize in
Yeah.
terms of its rules. I mean, it didn't even want to do seatbelts back several decades ago.
And
I mean,
we have several calls about the Montgomery County executive
yeah.
race. So, Martin, let's talk about that before we go to our callers. It's another dramatic one from the recount in the Democratic primary that led Mark Elrich to gaining the nomination to the entry of formerly and maybe future Democrat Councilmember Nancy Florine into the race as an independent. So what are the real or perceived differences between the two candidates on the issues important to Montgomery County voters?
Well, first off, credit due where credit is due, which is my colleague Ali Schweitzer has been reporting on this race, and she did a great story this week that really boils down the race to the issue of development, which is big, not just in Montgomery County, it's big across the region. But Mark Elrich, and he'll say he's not anti-development, but he is concerned about development, about the pace of development. He wants developers to kick in more money for infrastructure and that sort of thing. Nancy Florine, on the other hand, thinks he is anti-development and thinks that the county needs to be more flexible, needs to build more because people want to live there. And if you're not building enough for people to live there, it just means housing prices go up. I mean, you get the situation with schools being overcrowded and then putting a moratorium on construction on some of the inner suburbs. So it's that's one big dividing point. And Nancy Florine's campaign has been flooded with donations from developers. I mean, there's a PAC funded by developers that's supporting her. So it's kind of divided Montgomery County into the sort of liberal progressive wing that Mark Elrich represents, who's very skeptical and concerned about development, and the Nancy Florine wing, which is more business friendly. And I've noticed some alignment there on the gubernatorial side. You have like the sort of Montgomery County Democrats who will vote for Florine and for Hogan, and then the Elrich jealous kind of contingent. So it's an interesting division there.
Tom,
But,
sure
but
with you
both
and
of
I-
them, Mark Elrich will say that he has essentially voted. He and Nancy Florine have almost identical voting records on the county council. But it will be interesting to see what happens because Robin Ficker is the Republican nominee, and there was some thought, well, maybe these Florine and Elrich would split the vote and he would win. Although I've heard a lot less of that now because.
Well, you're about to hear some more of it from Anna in
I
Rockville,
thought you were
Maryland.
going to say Robin Ficker was
Anna-
on the line.
which is also not unlikely. Anna, you are on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, I'm in Brookville, actually, but that's exactly what I was worried about because Florine seemed more attractive to me as a candidate than Elrich, but I don't want to contribute to throwing the race to Ficker. So any advice on that?
Well, I think Florine, as much as she disagrees with Mr. Elrich on a variety of issues, she just personally didn't like the idea that he would become the county executive. And so she was retiring. The Democratic Party gave her a big retirement party last May, and she was saying goodbye to everyone. But then when the race was so close for the county executive, she said she would have been for anyone in the Democratic Party other than Mark. So it's as much personal as it is policy.
And I think on the one thing I have to say, the numbers, not to say that Mr. Ficker couldn't win if the vote is split a certain way, but many moons would have to align for that to happen. Just by virtue of the sheer numbers of Democrats versus Republicans, you need just about every Republican in Montgomery County to come out and vote for Mr. Ficker, which they won't. And I'm not saying because they don't like him, but because, first of all, they don't all come out. And second of all, some may like Nancy Florine better. And you'd need a ton of Democrats to either stay home or
Mathematically,
not
it's
vote.
not likely.
Yeah, it's a very difficult
And
reality.
Anna, what, pray tell, is your objection to Mr. Ficker?
Well, he sounds like
You're going like, how
completely-
much time do you have?
Yeah. No, he just sounds like a completely implausible candidate.
Okay, well, this is his 20th run for office. He has been elected once, and he's certainly hoping to be elected a second time.
And can we very quickly, he has support. He was the person who backed public financing and limiting tax increases in Montgomery County.
And term limits.
And term limits, yeah.
Sorry, term limits.
Thank you for your call, Anna. Here is Matt in Bethesda. Matt, your turn.
Thank you, Kojo. I also share the concern of any chance of Robin Ficker getting elected to any position, and I take comfort from what the panel said about the likelihood of that.
We're not here to comfort you, Matt. That's for your therapist. But go right ahead.
I'm still flummoxed by this race, even if you subtract him, because Elrich, I just am not sure he has the temperament and the ability to work well. And then I see Florine, and I feel like if she had really wanted to be in the race, she should have been in the primary. And the idea, as I think Tom was mentioning, that this is just her personally being offended by the idea of Elrich as executive. It's very hard to find a reason to pull the lever for either one of them.
And
one of her critics has said that she's trying to effect a personal veto over the Democratic Party's choice. Whether that's true or not, but she has her own substantial support, though, so that's why it's a very interesting race. The question is, being all in with developers, is that worse or better than being skeptical of developers? And I think that's the difference in the campaign.
Martin, how can Maryland voters find out more about what's on their ballots?
I could give out Tom Sherwood's cell phone number, but I won't be that guy. So instead, I would say you can come to WAMU.org. We have a Maryland voter guide for some of the statewide races and the ballot questions, including the ones on Montgomery County and Prince George's County ballots. Prince George's County votes on just about every big capital project. So they want to build a library, they have to vote on it. So anyhow, we have information there. The Washington Post has obviously done great reporting. Baltimore Sun, I'd say, Google, just in every other case, is a very good friend of yours. So, if you Google Maryland elections candidates, you'll find some interesting information out there. But yeah, WMU, public radio.
D.C. voters don't have a...
We didn't mention David Trone, the most expensive man in the history of congressional. Can we just take 30 seconds on him?
Sure.
David Trone running in the 6th congressional district against Ami Hober. Counting his 2016 race, close to $30 million of his own money virtually to get elected. Is he going to make it this time? I know you can't say yes to that, but he's favored. Is that not?
His chances seem to be good.
Okay, but David Trone, very interesting news.
D.C. voters don't have a ballot initiative to choose this time around, but they do have council members and ANC. How can people find out what is all on the ballot in D.C. on Tuesday?
So we also did a voter guide there. DCS and WMU teamed up, so we have a voter guide for all those races, not the ANC races, unfortunately, because there's like 300 of those, and we couldn't talk to every single candidate. Greater Washington, which, the full disclosure, has a perspective on things, but they have endorsed ANC candidates, and they've looked at some of the races. But yeah, those are two good resources, I think.
The hottest race in D.C. is the race for one of two open at-large D.C. council seats. Has become very contentious. Mayor Bowser has taken the unprecedented step of endorsing a candidate, Dion Reeder, taking on a sitting council member, Alyssa Silverman. It's now time for the voters to decide, but I do have to mention that the Office of Campaign Finance dismissed a complaint that was brought against Bowser for attending a rally with Reeder, saying that the public citizen was not able to prove that Bowser campaign funds were used to help the candidate in that situation. But tell us about these two candidates, in particular, Silverman and Reeder. Who are they, and what is this choice really about?
Well, this is an interesting one, and it really only got interesting about September when Mayor Bowser jumped in and endorsed Dion Reeder, who is a restaurant owner in Anacostia. She's worked in different D.C. government capacities. She also worked at the federal government level. But her general pitch is, I'm a bridge builder. I'm the sort of person who has experience, kind of bridging the divide between the different communities in the district. She lives in Ward 1 but works in Ward 8, talks about that a lot. And she just says the city needs someone like her to kind of get over some of its persistent divides.
And she opposes the financing for paid family leave.
Right. She opposes paid family leave is one of the marquee issues. She was also against Initiative 77, which was the tipped wage initiative. Alyssa Silverman, on the other hand, is kind of more in the progressive vein of things. She's kind of celebrates the fact that she's she conducts dogged oversight of city agencies, which is one of the reasons that the mayor said she's supporting Dion Reeder. She said that Alyssa's oversight crossed the line. The Washington Post editorial board, which endorsed Dion, called her caustic. So there's some kind of personality things going on there. But yeah, I think
Tom Sherwood, we don't have a lot of time left, but put on your trained statistician, mathematician hat and respond to Carl's email. Is it true that voting only for Elissa Silverman and not exercising your second vote will double the total for her?
That is called bullet voting, that if you only use one of your two votes and vote for one candidate, that you eliminate the likelihood that the other candidate will get enough votes. There's some real dispute about the math of whether that works or not, but it can make you feel better.
But I think the key thing voters should know is that they have two votes. They can choose to use one. They can choose to use two.
You cannot vote twice for one person.
Right, exactly.
Somebody asked me if you could vote twice for Dion or twice for Elissa. No, you cannot. You can use two votes if you want, but you don't have to. You can just use one.
We're almost out of time, but there's another hot race in the district that you guys may not know about. Here it comes from Nelson in Washington, D.C. Nelson
Ryman Snyder.
Nelson, go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm running against Eleanor Holmes Norton for the D.C. delegate position, and my campaign has commissioned a poll on no vote, no tax, and over 80% of the residents of the district oppose paying federal income tax until we get statehood or voting representation in Congress.
Does that poll indicate what your chances are against Eleanor Holmes Norton?
About the same, 80%. Nelson, you've run a number of times. Is it your effort just to promote statehood? Is that right? More than you don't really expect to beat Eleanor Holmes Norton?
No. But I think that to get attention to the plight that the grievance that we have, we're the only American citizens who are taxed without our consent. We should push this legislation in Congress to get the word out.
Nelson,
and I think
you.
That'll get more attention to statehood than Eleanor has gotten in almost 30 years in Congress.
Nelson, thank you very much for your call. Martin Ostermeer, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Eliu, thank you for joining us.
Thanks also for
Walter
having me.
Fauntroy tried that. Don't pay taxes. So did Marion Barry. It will never happen.
Up next, Christian Dorsey, Vice Chair of the Arlington County Board and the Principal Director of the WMATA Board of Directors. Tom Sherwood, you moderated a debate in the Ward 6 Council race this week between incumbent Charles Allen and Republican challenger Michael Bekesha. Is that how that's pronounced? What's likely to happen there?
Charles Allen is considered by everyone paying attention, including Mr. Bekesha, to win. Charles Allen is very well grounded in Ward 6 for this election cycle. Mr. Bekesha is not well known. His entire life has been. He's worked for the Judicial Watch, which is a very conservative organization. He's the lead attorney on both immigration law, toughening immigration law, and he's been one of the lead attorneys in trying to release Hillary Clinton's emails. He's not very well known in Ward 6.
And joining us now is Christian Dorsey, Vice Chair of the Arlington County Board and Principal Director of the WMATA Board of Directors. Christian Dorsey, thank you for joining us.
Oh, good to be with you, Kojo.
Here's something everybody...
That voice is... wow.
It's striking. Something everybody in the region has been talking about this week. The reinstallation of D.K. Durkin as the head coach of Maryland football, and then a day later his firing by the president of the university, Wallace Lowe, who had apparently been threatened by the Board of Regents that if he did not retain Coach Durkin, that he himself would be fired, and he had apparently decided that he'll be resigning next year anyway, and he went ahead and said, "Oh, what the heck, I'm going to fire the guy," and fired.
Well, what's sad about this is that
now the head of the Board of Regents has resigned.
Yeah. Well, we cannot forget that a 19-year-old student died on the playing field because he's not properly cared for. And it's been a horrific mess. Now the Middle States Accrediting Commission, I don't know its official name, is asking the Maryland University system, how is it that the Regents could impose its will on personnel decisions? I want to just point Sally Jenkins, who's a very well-known sports writer.
I have never seen Sally Jenkins write a more, shall we say, vociferous, if you will.
Unforgiving.
I could hear her when I read it.
First sentence, parents, don't send your kids to Maryland to play football. It's not a safe place for athletes or students. It's a place for belly snakes. And John Feinstein, a famous sports reporter and commentator, the Maryland Board of Regents had 2 months to do the right thing and did the complete opposite. And now there's some question whether the president of the university might stay because he was leaving because he was overruled by the
He was being
regents.
pushed out,
And
essentially.
James T. Brady, who was the chair of the regents, has quit. It is a horrific mess, beginning with the death of the student and how the state has handled it. It's been an embarrassment.
Christian Dorsey, have you been following this?
I have, and you know, it's regrettable. I'm a Hoya alum, but I wish no ill will towards Terp Nation, and it's just really sad. And Tom, you know, thanks for bringing it back to where this all started, the death of a young man.
Jordan McNair.
Jordan McNair, indeed. And, you know, ultimately, however the accountability falls, hopefully there's long-lasting reforms at Maryland to make sure athletics don't overrule good common sense, because, you know, these young men and women are entrusted to college communities, and, you know, that sort of thing should never happen as it did.
On to Arlington. Your voters, Arlington voters, have their own ballot questions to vote on this year, including ones on Metro, public schools, and parks. What are you looking out for in the local election in Arlington?
Well, hopefully everybody in our community is going to authorize our capital spending on all of those areas. And of course, Kojo, you know, Metro is particularly near and dear to my heart, and it's essential if we are going to continue to invest in Metro so that it can deliver not only for Arlingtonians, but it's a regional system.
And you're being called on to invest some more because on Monday, Metro General Manager Paul Wiedefeld proposed some big changes along with a new budget. What are some of those changes, and what will be the cost?
Well, there are a lot of rider initiatives in that budget there, Kojo, and some of them are things that you know, we really have looked to do for a long time, like making sure we can have service across all lines that's frequent and reliable. He proposes some changes to pass products so that it's cheaper to ride bus, cheaper to ride rail. And then there are also some investments in providing for complete lines going out in the yellow line and as well as the red line. There are a lot of different things that are good and appealing for riders. However,
go ahead.
If you have questions about any of this, by the way, call us at 800-433-8850. Go to kojoshow.org, watch the live video stream, ask your question there, send us a tweet at Kojo Show or email to kojo@wamu.org.
Financing is the bread and butter of Metro. You
Yeah.
know, I don't know why people think Metro doesn't deserve more money. They always complain it's not well run, but you need money also to run it well, right? But what about this idea, which is pretty cool, of maybe just charging $2 on the weekends to get people to ride Metro Rail?
That's one of the proposals.
What is the chances of that happening? Now, I might even go back to riding Metro if that happened.
well, you know, that may work for you, Tom, but I got to tell you, I'm hearing from a lot of people that even at $2, if they got to wait 30 minutes for a train, they're still not going to ride it on the weekend.
True.
So I think we have to figure out how to get more service on the weekends.
More frequency of the trains.
More frequency of the trains.
I
That's
have
really
friends who
gonna be
ride
the push
buses,
point.
and my ex-wife even rides the bus, and she says it is terrific. She can look at her phone and walk outside from someplace and get on a bus and go home. But she says, I cannot plan on Metro like that.
Absolutely.
Excuse me, the rail system like that.
During the week, I use Metro. I am a power user of Metro during the week. But even I, given my
Did you come here on Metro today?
you know, not today, not today. But I was coming from another meeting. But usually I would.
Okay.
But on the weekends, I can't do it because I don't have that much time to allot to waiting idly. And until we fix that, I don't think we're going to get the weekend riders back. $2 will help, but it's not going to solve it.
You have said of Wiedefeld's proposed budget that, quoting here, this is going to be a really tough budget for the board to work through. We're going to have to really roll up our sleeves and make some interesting trade-offs. What kinds of trade-offs are you imagining?
Well, what I meant by that, Kojo, is the budget as presented, we can't just approve up or down because we have requirements by legislation passed in Maryland and Virginia which limits the amount of funding that can come from those respective jurisdictions. So putting everything that the general manager proposed into the pot exceeds that cap. So we'd have to make some trade-offs. So the question would be, do we do all of those extensions of the rail lines as proposed, or do we limit it somehow? Do we do the $2 on the weekends, or do we say, let's do something a little less expensive? Do we do those fare product reductions now, or do we focus on 8-car trains? Those are going to be the decisions that we're going to have to make, because despite what you may hear from anybody, we can't just do an up or down yes or no, because we don't have the legal ability to do that.
Last month, the Metro Board decided against eliminating the Rider Advisory Council after a lot of blowback. What is the purpose of the Rider Advisory Council, and why was cutting it even on the table in the first place?
Well, I'm going to be generous because I was not one of the people who wanted to see the Riders Advisory Council go away. In fact, I worked to make sure it was preserved. It's the one body that the Board of Directors has that is advisory to it that represents riders throughout the region. So it's our direct way to interact with and learn from and discuss issues with riders. It's been around for 13 or so years, and this is very common in the transit industry. They exist in many places, and our job, I think, as good stewards of the system is to make sure we constantly have front and center riders' voices and perspectives.
The membership of that group, though, it dropped off, and the meetings have been lackluster. I mean, it was not doing well, but that's not a reason to kill it. That's a reason to reinvigorate it.
Absolutely, and it's important to note the reason that attendance has dropped off and meetings have been a little lackluster is because we were reviewing the RAC over the course of this year to see how we can make it more effective.
The Riders Advisory Council.
Thank you,
right.
Thank you. And so, yes, the idea that we would just do away with something because it's not as effective as it could be without thinking about how to make it effective was always contrary to my values.
Well, this is lunchtime, so a lot of people are interested in this particular aspect of Metro. Here is Pierre in Ward 7. Pierre, your turn.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to know more about the Metro Board. Could you comment on how Corbett Price could ever be considered qualified? He doesn't know Metro, but has been a great fundraiser for Bowser. He had a hand in the horrible outcomes at UMC, the one hospital with maternal services east of the river. Why is he on the Metro Board? He seems even less qualified than Jack Evans. Thanks for taking my call.
Wait a minute, Pierre. You indicated to our call screener that you wanted to ask about food on Metro. You have no such interest anymore?
I am a little bit interested, but I'm more interested in accountability and outcomes.
Well, this is clearly a case where some viewers and listeners give a fake reason why they want to be on the air, and they do into a diatribe like that.
You could have easily given the real reason, and we would have still taken your call.
But Jack
anyway.
Evans has been re-elected twice now as chairman. Is that correct? And
That's right.
He certainly knows about the Metro system, whether you like what he does or not. And Corbett he's a professional. He got mixed up in the United Medical Center stuff there, but comment maybe about the board themselves. It's been restructured because of the funding, and you're only going to be on the board for a year. Is that correct? As a voting member from Northern Virginia, and that changes every year, or potentially could change.
It potentially could change. That's going to be up to
you have
my
to be
colleagues
renewed
in Virginia. That's right. So I have to do a really good job.
But is the new management system where you don't have a whole 16 votes, but you have to get 8 votes now?
Yeah.
Is that working?
You know, it's too early to tell. We missed a lot when we lost the alternate members from the discussion. So I still feel their absence in the quality of our discussion, and I think we're going to feel it with the workload. You know, every jurisdiction has the right to put forward on the board who they think will best represent their interests. I'd never be one to second guess what the mayor of the District of Columbia has done. We've all got to figure out a way to work together. And, for the most part, it does work. Sometimes it's kind of painful, and the political theater, I'm sure for you all, is amusing. But, we'll see. We'll see whether we can get it done, and this budget's going to be a key test.
And you're also moving the headquarters from its original headquarters downtown near the Capital One Center. You're moving to my neighborhood in Southwest.
Oh, good. That's your neighborhood.
That'd be good.
DC Uplink tweets in, when are we going to get a metro extension to Woodbridge at the 1 and a light rail or tunnel over the Dale City, Manassas? When is automated train control going to be put in? It's not as complicated as people think. Mr. Mr.
Dorsey. Let me take the last one. Automated train control is something that is not very complicated, and this was something that Metro stopped using exclusively after the Fort Totten crash for a lot of different reasons, and we're on track to re-implement that over the course of next calendar year. So by the end of next calendar year, I expect that we'll start piloting a return to automatic train control, which will make for a much smoother, more efficient ride and maybe get more trains through some bottlenecks a lot easier.
We don't have a lot of time. Can we start talking Amazon?
I wanted to ask him about Cashing In, the Fox News Channel program. You used to appear on Cashing In.
That's years ago, Tom.
I know, but I was watching the video of you. You were like the the liberal token sane person. That's the Fox program on the stock market. It used to be on quite a bit, weren't you?
I was. That was a different lifetime ago, and I have to say I don't miss it at all.
Okay, Amazon. People in the real estate business are eagerly anticipating the announcement. Some are looking towards Northern Virginia. JBG Smith Properties, which owns commercial property in Crystal City, has seen its stock values rising, for example. But the site is only one of 20 possible choices. A little premature here?
You know, I think we're still in the game. I think we're still under consideration. So, if people want to get excited, I guess that's their right. But I have no idea if we'll be selected. But I will say, I think we deserve to be.
Amazon would take JBG owns virtually all the buildings in Crystal City, and if Amazon has talked about buying JBG, it would give it a ready-made palette of buildings where it could come in. Would you be supportive of that?
Well, certainly I think the prospects of Amazon locating in this region is a good thing for this region. The particular details of where they'd want to be and how many square feet they'd want to occupy, those are details that we work through thoughtfully, as is the Arlington way. But conceptually, I think it's a great thing for this region.
Crystal City has never recovered from the base realignment move when all the federal agencies moved out.
That's right. And this would certainly help us locally, but it would help the region. And when we think about making sure Metro can be sustainable, dealing with some of the issues with regional growth, this would be a hugely positive thing in concept and in theory.
If it comes to Arlington, it would mean 122,000 new residents, according to analysts. Would Arlington be ready for that?
Over the course of decades, yes, that's the kind of growth that we're planning for. Arlington has long planned for that kind of a growth trajectory. If it comes instigated by Amazon or a collection of other businesses that grow in our county, it really doesn't matter. We're ready for it.
What have you been hearing from residents if the idea of landing Amazon was placed on a referendum? What do you think people would say?
I think right now people are in the let's hear the details mode. They're not ready to say yay or nay.
It's not that 50,000 people are going to move into Arlington or this region overnight. Initially, Amazon wants about 800,000 square feet of office space to plant a flag, and then quickly go up to like 8 million square feet.
That's right.
I think. How much do you happen to know? How many square feet of office space there is in Crystal City?
Of course, we've planned for about 8 million square feet of filled office space in Crystal City.
It could become Amazon City, not Crystal City.
No, even at 8 million square feet, Amazon would essentially backfill what we lost with BRAC. So, we're not talking about overwhelming our community. And all of those people, Tom, you mentioned, many of them already live here.
Politics hour, we got to ask you, how much are you paying attention to the Tim Kaine, Corey Stewart race?
Oh, I pay attention closely.
You don't have any fears about how that's going to come out, do you?
I don't, but I swear, Tom, after 2016, I don't want to ever be confident again, because I was pretty confident in 2016 that we would not have the result that we have. So with that, I feel good about Tim Kaine, but everybody better show up on Tuesday.
You're a council member in Arlington. You're vice chair this
That's
year,
right.
Is that an annual thing you get appointed?
So our titles are changed from year to year. So potentially next year I could be the chair of the board.
Could you possibly be wanting to run something more? I mean, you graduated from Georgetown in foreign affairs, and you went to Arlington, which is not quite foreign affairs.
Sometimes it feels
How did you
like
get off into that? Into public policy issues?
Foreign affairs and diplomacy and local politics to me are very much extensions of the same skill sets. So I apply what I learned all the time.
Statewide office for you, maybe?
Not right now. I'm really happy locally.
Will emails, we keep hearing about self-driving cars, but I never hear about self-driving trains. Much of the Metro's automatic controls were deactivated after the 2009 crash. It seems that Metro's operating environment is a lot more controlled and predictable than the road. So why aren't we on the verge of self-driving trains? Wouldn't that make much higher passenger volume and transit speed at an affordable price a real possibility?
It sure would, but the market is not there yet. The industry is not there. We have to, move towards automatic train control, which still requires a driver but automates most of the systems. But we are still, I think from just a feasibility perspective, that's still a ways away. But the caller or the emailer is right. A train environment is a great way to think about autonomous vehicles.
Arlington is preparing for 5G technology, but not everyone seems to be happy with the progress. What do you see as the stumbling blocks for getting 5G up and running?
I don't really see any stumbling blocks. Right now, we have legislation in Virginia which requires us localities to move quickly. We're trying to move as quickly as we can to make sure we provide fair access for all of the providers and we don't clutter our community with a bunch of 2 by 3 foot boxes on every light pole that will overwhelm the weight and require a lot of maintenance. So we're trying to figure out how it all works, but we're trying to embrace it as soon as we can.
I only have a couple of minutes left, but here's Mike on schools. Mike in Arlington, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
I heard about Arlington being ready to absorb Amazon coming in and the new residents. But I'm a resident in South Arlington, and we are currently going into a big problem with School County moving our kids out of southern Arlington, and the county is not adding any elementary school to
overcrowding
that area.
In schools, Christian Dorsey.
So, key to this is that Amazon would not be bringing all of those people all at once. Not everybody who worked there would live in Arlington and therefore would have kids in school in Arlington. And certainly not everyone who would work at Amazon is going to have kids. And this is all happening gradually over the course of decades. I think that would work very well with our school population and not overwhelm it at any one time.
Also would help you with property taxes. I mean, Arlington is principally funded by property taxes.
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Commercial and residential.
That's correct.
So any increase. This is a major corporation. I would think most anybody would want it, but you just want to make sure it is melded into the community.
That's right.
And doesn't melt the community.
That is a perfect slogan. And, thanks for bringing up the property taxes, because any contribution from an Amazon or any other company or companies reduces the burden that we require from residential taxpayers, and that's a good thing.
And remind people that Amazon is going to be announced before the end of this year.
Correct. I hope so.
Christian Dorsey is Vice Chair of the Arlington County Board and a Principal Director on the WAMATA Board of Directors. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and happy 20th anniversary, Kojo.
Thank you. That's it for today's show. Today's Politics Hour was produced by Mark Gunnery. You can catch more election coverage on WAMU 88.5 and join me and resident analyst Tom Sherwood here on election night at 8 p.m. We'll be tracking the biggest races across the region. Coming up Monday, we'll get the latest on the scandal embroiling the University of Maryland, from the retention and firing of Coach D.J. Durkin to the possible loss of accreditation to the retirement announcement of University President Wallace Lowe. There's a lot to talk about. Plus, how have influences on social media changed the local restaurant landscape and food criticism? That all starts Monday at noon. Until then, thank you for listening. I'm Kojo Namdi.